The Galactic Federation had explored countless planets. They had encountered countless species, each more advanced and powerful than the last. Earth, by contrast, was an afterthought. A backwater planet, hardly worth the effort of formal first contact. To the galactic soldiers, it was a joke. A place where primitive creatures still roamed, where the so-called intelligent species hadn't even mastered space travel properly. They laughed as they approached the planet's surface, exchanging stories about Earth that bordered on insulting. "Earth," one soldier said, voice dripping with disdain. "The last time I checked their data feeds, they still think hunting animals is a legitimate way to survive. Can you believe it?" His companion chuckled. "No surprise there. This is a planet where most of them live in trees or some stone huts. It's a wonder they haven't been wiped out by their own stupidity." Another soldier, taller and more imposing than the rest, chimed in with a smirk. "Their wildlife is probably more advanced than they are. Imagine needing to hunt with tools instead of just manipulating energy fields." The group erupted in laughter, their sleek, silvery uniforms gleaming under the sterile lights of their ship. Earth was a stepping stone, nothing more. They were here to assess, collect data, and move on. The Federation had plenty of planets to examine, and Earth just happened to be next in line. There was no threat, no challenge, and certainly no excitement. Their commander, seated at the helm of the ship, didn't bother joining the conversation. His face was stern, focused on the mission parameters scrolling across the screen. Though he didn't share the same amusement, he wasn't concerned either. Earth was a blip on the radar, a low-priority task that would be completed with little effort. Still, he made sure his team was equipped for any potential dangers, however unlikely. Protocol was protocol, after all. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship's sensors began gathering information. Terrain scans, life form readings, environmental assessments, all confirming what they already knew: Earth was an unimpressive planet. There were no signs of advanced civilizations, no energy readings that indicated anything beyond rudimentary technology. The most dangerous life forms were large land mammals, but even those were manageable compared to what they had faced on other worlds. The commander glanced at the readings and gave a slight nod. "Standard procedure," he said. "We land, secure the perimeter, and begin the data collection. I expect this mission to be quick." The soldiers nodded, their previous mockery giving way to the efficient professionalism they were trained for. They prepared their equipment, adjusting their helmets and checking their weapons, though no one expected to need them. It was a routine mission, and they were more than ready. As the ship touched down in a clearing, the soldiers disembarked, scanning the area with their advanced tech. The forest stretched out before them, dense and green, but their readings showed no immediate threats. Small, scattered life forms moved in the distance, but none posed any danger. "Hardly seems worth the effort," one soldier muttered, his voice crackling through the comms. "A few scans, a quick report, and we're out of here." Another soldier, visibly younger and more eager, laughed. "Maybe we'll get to see some of their legendary hunters. You know, the ones who chase after animals with sticks." More laughter followed. The idea of Earth's humans being anything other than primitive was ridiculous to them. They had heard the stories of human hunters, how they supposedly tracked and killed wild animals with nothing but basic tools. It was laughable to the soldiers, whose weapons could vaporize a creature in seconds. To them, humans were little more than animals themselves, fighting for survival on a planet that hadn't yet evolved beyond its early stages. They moved through the forest with ease, their technology guiding them. The soldiers continued to joke as they advanced, clearly not taking the mission seriously. It was hard to blame them. Earth was a non-threat. In their minds it always had been. The only reason they were here was to fulfill the Federation's mandate of documenting all planets, regardless of their perceived worth. As they walked, their sensors picked up something unusual, a large heat signature not far from their location. The soldiers paused, curious but not concerned. "Looks like we've got something big nearby," one of them said, glancing at the readings. "Probably one of those famous Earth predators we keep hearing about." The commander nodded. "Proceed with caution, but keep your weapons ready. No need to take risks. They advanced toward the heat signature, their steps silent as their advanced armor absorbed the sounds of the forest floor beneath them. The younger soldier who had been laughing earlier raised his weapon, eyes scanning the trees ahead. The heat signature was moving, slow but deliberate. It was large, but not fast. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. As they neared the source, the trees parted slightly, revealing a massive animal moving through the underbrush. The soldiers paused, taking in the sight. It was a bear, huge, lumbering, and completely indifferent to their presence. The creature was covered in thick, matted fur, its muscles rippling as it moved, clearly a powerful predator in its own right. The younger soldier let out a low whistle. Well, that's impressive. But still, primitive. A creature like that wouldn't last 5 seconds against any of us. The others nodded in agreement. They watched as the bear moved, its senses attuned to something in the forest, though it paid no attention to the soldiers. To them, it was just another example of Earth's outdated ecosystem, strong, but ultimately no match for the kind of technology they possessed. The commander signaled for them to continue moving. The bear wasn't their concern. They had data to collect, and the creature wasn't a threat. They walked past the bear, their equipment recording every detail of the surrounding area. The forest was dense, but easy to navigate for them. Every step they took reinforced their belief that Earth was exactly what they thought it was: primitive, unsophisticated, and ultimately irrelevant. As they continued deeper into the forest, the laughter and joking subsided, replaced by the quiet hum of their scanning devices. They had a job to do, and the sooner it was done, the sooner they could leave. Earth had nothing to offer them beyond the data they were required to collect. None of them had any reason to believe otherwise. For now. The hunter moved through the dense forest with ease, his footsteps silent on the thick layer of leaves beneath him. He had spent years perfecting his craft, learning every detail of the wilderness he called home. Each fallen branch, each rustling leaf told a story, and he could read it all. It was his skill, his life's work. His breath was steady, his eyes focused on the trail ahead. Today, like so many days before, he was hunting. He had been tracking the bear for hours. It was a large one, older and stronger than most. The tracks told him as much: the size of the paw prints, the depth they pressed into the ground, the patterns in which they wandered. This bear was experienced, but so was he. He knew its habits, its path. It was just a matter of time before their encounter. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature. Birds called out from the treetops, and the wind whispered through the branches. To the hunter, these sounds were familiar and comforting, but they were also signs. They told him where his prey might be, how far it had traveled, and whether it was aware of his presence. So far, everything was as it should be. He adjusted the strap of his rifle, the weight of it a constant reminder of the task at hand. The rifle wasn't new, but it was reliable, like everything he used. He had no need for fancy equipment or advanced technology. His hands, his eyes, and his instincts were all he needed. The rifle was just a tool, an extension of his skill. He could hunt with or without it, but today he had chosen to bring it along. It wasn't a decision made out of necessity, but out of respect for the animal he was pursuing. The hunter paused, crouching low to the ground as he studied the tracks again. They were fresh. The bear had passed through here recently, not more than an hour ago. He scanned the surrounding trees, looking for signs of movement, but there was nothing yet. It was close, though. He could feel it in his bones. He stood slowly, careful not to disturb the forest around him. There was no need to rush. Patience was his greatest ally. A good hunter never hurried, never forced an encounter before it was time. The bear would make a mistake eventually, and when it did, he would be ready. As he continued forward, his mind drifted to the lessons he had learned over the years. His father had been the one to teach him, showing him how to track, how to move through the woods without being seen or heard. His father had been a quiet man, but every word he spoke carried weight. The hunter had learned more from those few words than from anything else in his life. Respect the land, his father had told him once. Respect the animals. They're not just prey, they're a part of this world, same as you. Treat them well, and they'll teach you more than any man could. Those words had stayed with him, guiding him through every hunt. He didn't hunt for sport, nor for the thrill of the kill. He hunted because it was what he knew, what he was good at. The forest was his home, the animals his neighbors. Each hunt was a test of his skills, a way to prove that he still belonged here, that he still understood the balance of nature. The hunter stopped again, this time at the edge of a small clearing. The tracks led straight through it, and he could see the unmistakable signs of a recent passage. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, and the faint scent of the bear hung in the air. He crouched once more, his eyes narrowing as he studied the area. The clearing was open, exposed. The bear wouldn't linger here long. It would move quickly, using the cover of the trees on the other side to continue its journey. The hunter knew the path it would take. There was a stream just beyond the clearing, and the bear would likely stop there to drink. It was the perfect place for an ambush. But he wasn't in a hurry. He had time, and he would use it wisely. The hunter circled the clearing, staying within the cover of the trees as he made his way toward the stream. His movements were slow and deliberate, each step placed carefully to avoid making any noise. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of the bear toward him. It was close, closer than he had expected. He paused again, listening to the forest. There it was, a faint rustling sound, barely perceptible but unmistakable. The bear was ahead, just beyond the next ridge. It hadn't seen him yet, hadn't caught his scent. He was still in control of the hunt. He moved forward, his rifle at the ready. The underbrush thickened as he neared the ridge, but he navigated it with ease, his body moving as one with the environment. Every sense was heightened, his focus sharp. The world narrowed to just him and the bear. As he reached the top of the ridge, he spotted it. The bear was massive, even larger than he had imagined. It stood at the edge of the stream, its head down as it lapped at the water. Its fur was thick and dark, its muscles rippling beneath the surface. This was a powerful animal, one that had lived a long life in the wilderness. The hunter watched for a moment, admiring the creature's strength and beauty. This was why he hunted, to witness moments like this, to be a part of the natural world in a way that few others could understand. The bear was not just his prey, it was his equal in many ways. They were both survivors, both skilled in their own right. He raised his rifle, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. But he didn't fire. Not yet. He waited, watching the bear's movements, studying its behavior. He needed to be sure, to pick the right moment. A single shot, well placed, would end the hunt quickly and cleanly. There was no room for error. The bear lifted its head, sniffing the air. It hadn't seen him, but it was aware of something. The hunter remained perfectly still, his heart steady, his breathing controlled. The bear's eyes scanned the area, but it didn't move. It was cautious, but not frightened. The hunter waited a moment longer, his focus unbroken. Then, as the bear turned slightly to move away from the stream, he squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the trees. The bear staggered, caught off guard by the sudden impact. It let out a low growl, turning in the direction of the sound, but it was already too late. The hunter's aim had been true, the shot clean. The bear collapsed near the edge of the stream, its body still. The forest went quiet again, the sounds of nature returning slowly as if nothing had happened. The hunter lowered his rifle, stepping forward to approach the bear. He knelt beside it, placing a hand on its thick fur. It was over. The hunt had been successful, just as he had known it would be. But as he stood there, looking down at the animal, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. Something in the air had changed. The forest, once so familiar, now felt different. The soldiers continued their steady march through the forest, their advanced equipment humming softly as it gathered data from the environment. Their confidence remained unshaken. They had no real reason to be concerned. Earth was a simple planet. Its creatures might be large, but they lacked the intelligence and technology to pose any true threat. The younger soldier, still amused by the simplicity of the mission, checked the readings on his arm panel. The heat signature is ahead. It's probably just another animal. The commander didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the data scrolling across his visor. It was all routine, just as expected. The scanners had detected no advanced technology, no sentient life forms that could rival their abilities. They would complete their mission and leave, perhaps with a few amusing stories to tell the others. As they approached the area where the heat signature was strongest, the trees thinned slightly, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood a man, rough, weathered, and completely out of place next to the advanced soldiers. He was holding a rifle, the kind they hadn't seen in years, something that looked more like an antique than a weapon. The soldiers stopped, taken aback for a moment by the unexpected sight. It was rare to see humans this deep in the wilderness, even on a planet like Earth. The man didn't seem to notice them at first. His attention was fixed on something else, something in the distance. He was calm, focused, entirely unaware of the soldiers standing behind him. One of the soldiers smirked. "Look at this guy. He's got an old rifle, probably thinks he's hunting something." The others chuckled quietly, watching the man with a mix of amusement and disbelief. To them, this human was nothing more than a relic, a symbol of Earth's backwardness. They had no reason to engage him, he was irrelevant to their mission. But the commander raised a hand, signaling for silence. His eyes narrowed as he studied the man, watching the way he moved. There was something different about him, something that didn't quite fit with the image they had of primitive humans. He was calm, too calm. The commander couldn't quite place it, but his instincts told him to be cautious. "Let's make contact," the commander said, his voice low but firm. "See if he can provide any information on the area." The soldiers moved forward, their weapons lowered but ready. They approached the man slowly, deliberately, their footsteps crunching softly on the forest floor. The man still didn't seem to notice them. He was focused on something else entirely, his eyes scanning the edge of the clearing. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his voice light and mocking. "Hey, old man. You lost out here? Need some help?" The man didn't respond. He kept his eyes forward, his grip on the rifle steady. The soldiers exchanged glances, puzzled by his lack of reaction. They were used to humans being either terrified or awestruck by their presence, but this man seemed indifferent. It was as if they weren't even there. The soldier spoke again, louder this time. "We're talking to you. What are you doing out here?" The man's head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge their presence, but his expression remained neutral. He didn't look scared or surprised, just aware. "I'm hunting," he said simply, his voice rough and quiet. The soldiers laughed. The idea that this man, with his outdated rifle and primitive appearance, could be hunting anything of significance was laughable to them. But the commander wasn't laughing. He was watching the man carefully, noticing the way he held his weapon, the way he positioned himself. This was no ordinary human. "Hunting what?" the younger soldier asked, still grinning. "Rabbits? Squirrels? Whatever it is, I'm sure we can handle it for you." The man didn't respond immediately. He turned his gaze back to the forest, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he was listening for something. The soldiers, impatient and annoyed by his silence, began to lose interest. Clearly, this human wasn't worth their time. But before they could turn away, the forest around them seemed to shift. There was a low, rumbling sound in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The soldiers tensed, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. "What's that?" one of them asked, glancing around. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised his rifle slightly, his body going still. The soldiers followed his gaze, their sensors picking up movement ahead. Something large was approaching. The heat signature they had detected earlier wasn't just an animal. It was much bigger than they had anticipated. The ground shook slightly as the creature came into view. It was a bear, a massive, hulking beast, far larger than anything the soldiers had seen before. Its fur was thick and matted, its eyes burning with a fierce, primal energy. It moved with terrifying power, its muscles rippling beneath its skin. The soldiers froze. For all their advanced technology and training, They hadn't been prepared for this. The bear was a force of nature, something beyond their control. The younger soldier, who had been laughing moments before, raised his weapon quickly. "We've got it under control," he said, his voice shaky. "Just a bear." He fired, the beam of energy from his weapon striking the bear squarely in the chest. But the bear didn't stop. It roared, the sound shaking the trees, and charged forward with incredible speed. The soldiers scattered, their weapons firing rapidly as they tried to bring the beast down. But the bear was relentless, its massive form crashing through their ranks. One soldier was knocked aside, his armor crumpling under the weight of the creature's paw. The man, still standing in the clearing, watched calmly as the chaos unfolded around him. He didn't move, didn't fire his rifle. He simply waited, his eyes following the bear's movements. The soldiers, panicking now, continued to fire, but their weapons seemed to have little effect. The bear was too close, too fast. One soldier was thrown into a tree, his body crumpling on impact. Another was swiped to the ground, his weapon flying from his hands. "Fall back!" the commander shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Regroup!" The remaining soldiers scrambled to obey, their movements frantic. The bear, sensing their fear, pressed its attack, its massive jaws snapping inches from the commander's face. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the man moved. He raised his rifle, aimed carefully, and fired. The shot rang out, a single, deafening crack that echoed through the trees. The bear staggered, a deep wound opening in its side. It let out a final, furious roar before collapsing to the ground, its body still. The soldiers, battered and bruised, stared in stunned silence as the man lowered his rifle. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable, and approached the fallen bear. Without a word, he knelt beside it, placing a hand on its fur. He didn't seem to notice the soldiers watching him, their shock evident on their faces. To him, they were irrelevant. The hunt was over. The commander, still catching his breath, approached cautiously. His eyes flicked between the man and the fallen bear, trying to make sense of what had just happened. You killed it," the commander said, his voice low. The man didn't look up. "It was time," he replied simply. The soldiers stood frozen, their shock slowly giving way to a deeper realization. This human, this lone man with a simple rifle, had taken down the bear with a single shot. All their advanced weapons, armor, and tactics had failed where his instinct and precision had succeeded. They exchanged glances, the disbelief still clear in their eyes. The younger soldier, still nursing the bruise from where the bear had thrown him aside, couldn't keep silent any longer. "That's impossible," he muttered, shaking his head. "There's no way he could have done that. It must have been luck." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. Luck didn't account for the way the hunter had moved, for the calm precision with which he had acted. The hunter hadn't been afraid. He hadn't hesitated. He had known exactly what to do, and he had done it. The commander, still watching the hunter carefully, stepped forward. "How?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "How did you do that?" The man stood slowly, wiping his hands on his worn pants. He turned to face the soldiers, his eyes calm and unwavering. "It's not about how," he said simply. "It's about knowing when." The answer seemed too simple, too vague, but the commander sensed there was more behind it. The hunter's eyes held a depth of understanding that went beyond anything the soldiers had encountered before. He hadn't just killed the bear, he had anticipated its every move. He had controlled the situation from the moment the beast appeared. The younger soldier, still fuming, pointed at the man. "You don't even have real technology. That rifle is ancient. How can you?" The commander cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Enough," he said. "This man just saved us." The younger soldier bit his tongue, but the frustration in his eyes remained. To him, everything about this encounter was wrong. They were supposed to be the superior force. They had the weapons, the armor, the technology. And yet they had been the ones scrambling for survival, while this human remained in control. The commander turned back to the hunter. You've been tracking this bear for a long time, haven't you? The man nodded. It's part of the job. You learn their habits, understand their patterns. They're predictable if you know what to look for. The soldiers listened, their confusion slowly turning into something else, something closer to respect, though none of them would admit it out loud. This human, who they had dismissed as primitive, clearly possessed knowledge and skills they had underestimated. He might not have their technology, but he had something else, something they were only beginning to understand. The commander gestured toward the bear, its massive body lying still in the clearing. We thought we could handle it with our weapons, but we failed. Why? The hunter shrugged slightly, as if the answer were obvious. You relied too much on your tech. That bear doesn't care about your weapons. It cares about survival. When it's cornered, it fights back with everything it has. You didn't know how to read it, how to anticipate its next move. You treated it like an enemy. I treated it like an animal. The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the soldiers' previous assumptions. They had been trained to think of everything as a challenge that could be overcome with superior firepower. But this man, this hunter, had approached the situation with a different mindset. To him, the bear wasn't just a threat, it was a living creature with instincts and behaviors that could be understood and predicted. The younger soldier scoffed, unable to hold back his frustration any longer. So you're saying we should have just watched it? Let it do whatever it wanted? The hunter shook his head. No. You need to act, but you need to act with purpose. That bear wasn't out to get you. It was defending itself. You came at it with aggression, and it responded with aggression. I knew when to strike because I knew when it would make a mistake. You didn't. The commander listened intently, his mind turning over the hunter's words. There was truth in what he said. The Federation's approach had always been to dominate, to impose their will on any situation. But here on Earth, that approach had failed. The bear had been a force of nature, something beyond their control, and the only one who had truly understood that was the man standing before them. After a long moment, the commander spoke again. We misjudged you, he said plainly. We thought Earth was a primitive place, and we thought you were no different from the animals we scanned. But you've proven us wrong. The hunter didn't respond immediately. He simply studied the soldiers, as if weighing his response. Finally, he nodded slightly. You're not the first to make that mistake. The words weren't meant to be harsh, but they stung nonetheless. The soldiers, who had been so sure of their superiority, now found themselves questioning everything they had assumed about this planet and its inhabitants. The commander stepped closer to the hunter, his tone more respectful now. What else don't we understand about Earth? What else have we missed? The hunter tilted his head slightly, considering the question. Earth is a tough place, he said finally. It's not just the animals. It's the land, the weather, the way everything works together. You can't just come in here and expect to control it. You have to live with it, learn from it. If you don't, well, you saw what happens. The commander nodded slowly, his respect for the man growing with each passing second. This was a perspective he had never encountered before, one that challenged everything he had been taught. On other planets, the Federation's technology had always been enough. But here, on Earth, something deeper was required. The younger soldier, still grappling with his own frustration, shook his head. But we're supposed to be the best. We're supposed to have the most advanced technology in the galaxy. How can this place be different? The hunter met his gaze, his expression calm. It's not about being the best. It's about knowing where you are and what you're dealing with. Technology can only take you so far. After that, it's about survival. And survival isn't always about who has the biggest gun. It's about who understands the world around them. The words struck the soldiers harder than they cared to admit. They had been trained to think of themselves as invincible, as the pinnacle of galactic evolution. But here, on this planet, they had been bested by a man who lived simply, who used nothing more than his instincts and his understanding of the land. It was a humbling realization. The commander took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving the hunter. We have much to learn, he said quietly. About Earth, and about ourselves. The hunter gave a small nod, as if he had heard those words before. You'll figure it out. But you have to be willing to listen. This planet doesn't care how advanced you are. It'll test you, push you. And if you're not careful, it'll break you. The commander understood now. This wasn't just about technology or weapons. It was about something deeper, something the Federation had overlooked in their pursuit of control. The hunter had survived on Earth not because of his tools, but because he understood its rules. The soldiers, standing silently around the fallen bear, realized that their mission had changed. They had come to Earth expecting to dominate, to impose their will. Instead, they had been taught a lesson, one they wouldn't soon forget. The commander stood still, absorbing the hunter's words. His soldiers remained quiet, the weight of their failure settling over them like a heavy cloud. The realization had finally sunk in. They had misjudged this planet and its people. The mission wasn't going as expected, but there was no room for pride now. They had been humbled. Pack up, the commander ordered, his voice steady but softer than before. The soldiers obeyed, gathering their equipment without the usual banter or arrogance. There was no room for laughter anymore. The hunter watched them, his expression unreadable. He wasn't gloating, wasn't enjoying their discomfort. He simply stood there, as though this moment, like every other in his life, was part of the natural order of things. The younger soldier, still struggling with the reality of their situation, glanced at the bear one last time before turning to the hunter. What do you plan to do now? The man didn't hesitate. Take care of what needs taking care of, he said plainly. To him, the death of the bear wasn't just the end of a hunt. It was part of a larger cycle, one that he respected and understood deeply. Is this how you live? The commander asked, his tone more curious than before. Hunting, facing dangers like this every day? The hunter nodded. It's life out here. You learn to deal with it, or you don't last long. It's not about wanting to face danger, it's about doing what has to be done. The land has rules. You either follow them or you get swept aside. The soldiers listened carefully now, no longer dismissing his words as the ramblings of a primitive man. There was something in the way he spoke, a quiet wisdom that they hadn't encountered before. On other worlds, they had seen creatures and civilizations that were far more advanced, but none of them had this understanding of their environment. Here, on Earth, the rules were different. The commander approached the hunter, standing just a few feet away. He had questions, but he knew better than to overwhelm the man with them. Instead, he asked the one that mattered most. What should we do now? It was a question he never expected to ask a human, but the events of the day had shifted everything. They needed guidance, something their technology couldn't provide. The hunter considered the question for a moment, then spoke. You leave this place. Go back to wherever you came from and think about what you've seen. Earth isn't a place you can control or conquer. You can learn from it, but you'll never own it. That's the lesson you need to take with you. The commander nodded slowly. It was advice he never thought he'd take, but he understood now that it was the only way forward. Earth was a planet that defied their expectations, and the people here, however simple they appeared, were far more complex than they had given them credit for. Will others come? The hunter asked, his gaze steady. More of your kind? The commander hesitated. It's possible. The Federation doesn't usually leave things unfinished. But after this, they'll think twice before sending anyone back here without careful planning. The hunter didn't seem surprised. That's what I figured. When they come, if they come, they'll face the same thing you did. This land doesn't change for anyone. The commander understood the gravity of the situation. Earth wasn't just another planet to document and move on from. It was a place that demanded respect, a place that would fight back if pushed too hard. And its people, no matter how small or insignificant they might seem on the galactic scale, were part of that fight. He turned to his soldiers, now fully packed and waiting for his orders. They were tired, bruised, but not broken. They had survived, barely, but the lesson had been learned. We'll report back, the commander said, his voice clear and decisive. And we'll tell them exactly what we've learned here. This planet, it's not what we thought. The soldiers nodded, their silence speaking volumes. They had seen enough. They didn't need any more convincing. As they prepared to leave, the younger soldier, still wrestling with the day's events, approached the hunter one last time. I don't get it, he admitted quietly. You don't have any of the things we do. No technology, no armor, no weapons like ours. How do you survive here? The hunter looked at him for a long moment before answering. I survive because I understand what it takes. It's not about the tools. It's about knowing your place in the world. You don't fight the land, you learn from it. That's how you survive. The younger soldier nodded, though he still didn't fully grasp the concept. He had spent his entire life relying on technology, on being part of a system that believed it could control everything. But here on Earth, that belief had been shattered. The commander stepped forward, his tone respectful. Thank you, he said simply. It was all he could offer, but it carried more weight than any of them could have imagined when they first arrived. The hunter nodded in return. Safe travels, he replied, his voice calm. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't expect any grand gestures. This was just another day in his life, another moment in the long cycle of survival. The soldiers turned and made their way back to the ship, their steps heavier than before. They had come to Earth as conquerors, but they were leaving as students. The forest around them seemed quieter now, as though it had already moved on from the chaos of the day. The commander glanced back one last time, seeing the hunter standing over the fallen bear, his silhouette blending into the trees. It was a sight he wouldn't soon forget. As the ship lifted off, the soldiers remained silent, each lost in their thoughts. The commander, too, reflected on the day's events. The hunter's words echoed in his mind, reshaping the way he thought about Earth and its people. This planet wasn't primitive. It wasn't backward. It was simply different, and that difference was something to be respected. When they broke through Earth's atmosphere, the commander finally spoke. We're going to need a new report. The soldiers glanced at him, curious. We'll tell the Federation what we saw, but we'll also tell them this: Earth isn't a threat. But if we treat it like one, we'll be making a huge mistake. The younger soldier, still processing everything, nodded slowly. So we leave them alone? For now, the commander replied. We've seen what we needed to see. Earth can handle itself. As the ship soared into space, the commander made a silent vow. He would ensure that the Federation understood the true nature of Earth. Not as a planet to be conquered or controlled, but as a world that demanded respect. And if they were wise, they would heed that lesson before it was too late. The stars stretched out before them, the vast expanse of the galaxy waiting. But behind them, the commander knew, was a planet unlike any they had encountered before.